Welcome to Golf and the Good Life, your guide to golf travel across the pond. I'm DJ Jones, joined as always by my good friend and colleague Connor Evers. Connor, it has been a bit of a whirlwind few weeks for us. We've been on a short hiatus while you and I were both across the pond for different lengths of time. Curious, how is your jet lag on that end of things?
I would say 5, 6 years ago, my jet lag was the worst when I went overseas. Now I adjust very quickly. I've got a good schedule down when I fly over. I'm coming back. I got back about 5, 6 days ago, and I'm still struggling, to be honest with you. But it's getting better. I fell asleep last night around 8 p.m., which is of the abnormal for me. But it's slowly but surely getting better. How about yourself, DJ?
It was a pretty tough adjustment as well. Getting old stinks, I guess, is part of it. I don't know if that's related, but it's got to be in some way. But yeah, I got back, and the next morning I was up at about 2:30 in the morning, unpacking my suitcase, organizing my closet, catching up on email, and it's like it's 3 a.m. What am I doing? But of course, to the body, it was more like 9, I guess. But tell me about your trip. Where did you go? Because it was a little spur of the moment.
It sure was. So I was in the Channel Coast of England, down in the Sandwich, Kent area. It's about, depending on traffic and what have you, especially getting out of London, it can be 2 hours to about 2.5 hour drive southeast of London, if you will. So I was down in the area, and a conjunction of Princess Golf Club, Royal St. Ports, and Royal St. George's hosted a tour operator appreciation day, if you will, for some other operators. And we were lucky to be invited, and was there for a very quick trip. I left on a Saturday night and arrived on Sunday and came back on Wednesday. So it was a great little trip. Got to see the area. The golf in the area is incredible. All three courses share the coastline, and was able to play Royal St. Ports as well as Royal St. George's, and both were a treat. Was able to visit Prince's as well. So great little stay down there, and it was, like I said, great to see the area, and it was a great trip.
Was there anyone else from our side of the Atlantic that made the trip over?
No, it was just myself from the States, so my American accent definitely stood out. But just myself there. But the other operators were stationed in Great Britain and Ireland. So
Well, it's kind of speaks to kind of what we've always said that
mm,
our investment of time is, sometimes it means flying over for a 3-day trip, but in the end, it just what it delivers to the experience by being able to you now talk about these courses firsthand and so forth can't be replaced
absolutely.
when it goes to planning those trips. But we had very, very different trips overseas.
Yeah.
Um, I was over for about 2.5 weeks. Ironically, in the span of that time, I played the same number of rounds of golf as you did. I'm sure that's going to be a disappointment
Very
to,
disappointed.
to, to you. But um, yeah, I arrived, and I'm from Florida, and I'm accustomed to hurricanes. And as I'm driving from, say, Manchester to East Lothian, there's all these signs on the road saying storm Babette warning. And I'm like, what is this about? And it turns out, and I think I knew this, but I had never really experienced it or thought much about it. But they named their winter storms. Sure enough, the day after I arrive, there's a literal hurricane that comes through East Lothian. It was every bit as bad as a storm that we have here. Apparently, a lot of the, or well, at least several of the courses up there sustained some damage, and it lasted for like 3 days.
Yeah.
And it was incredible. I mean, I opened up the curtain on day 2, and it's like, it's worse. Like, how is it actually worse? I mean, usually a hurricane blows through in 12 hours or something, and we're back to, moving on. But once that got past, it was sunny for about a week. I went from East Lothian, where, say Muirfield and North Berwick are, down to the West Coast, and saw our friends at Prestwick and Royal Troon and Turnberry and Western Gales, and then popped up to St. Andrews for a couple days, and then down to England's Gulf Coast, where I checked in with Royal Birkdale and Liverpool and Royal Lytham and St.
Mm,
Anne's and Hillside and Formby, and so I was all over the place. But
yeah.
I only played 2 rounds of golf in the whole thing, so I'm sorry, for that disappointment, but, I got plenty of great, video and drone footage and so forth. But I'm curious, what kinda car did you have during your trip?
Yeah, wasn't expected for this, but I was upgraded to a BMW sedan. So I got in and said a little prayer to make sure I didn't get any scratches or anything on it, as the color was crystal white. So it was pearl white. So it was nice driving around that. I was quite careful with it, but it was a nice treat. And yeah, it was nice driving. It was really, really, really hard bringing it back. That's what I told them at Arnold Clark at the Heathrow Airport. It was very hard giving it back. As the family from Australia that was dropping off their SUV said, probably they agreed with me. It would have been hard to drop it off too, but it was a nice treat. What about yourself,
Well
BJ?
well, unlike the golf, we had that in common because
Yeah.
I wound up with this brand new Mercedes. It had like 5,000 miles on it, jet black, had every
Wow.
bell and whistle, made my current car at home look like a jalopy. I mean, it was incredible, and I was so sad to give that car back,
Mm.
but I put, like, 1,500 miles on it in the course of the 2 weeks. I mean, it only had 5,000 to start with, so, I really moved into that car over the time. But I asked that question because it ties in perfectly with today's
Mm.
episode. You and I got to talking, during our trips, and, we have invested a lot of time here on the podcast with transportation, and in
Mm.
particular, hiring a driver host and the
Mhm.
benefits and so forth that comes with that. But we've we've paid very little attention to self-drive trips. And the fact is, roughly 85% of our travelers, they opt to hire a driver host, but that still means that 15% are out there taking on the road like we just did. And we also know that among our listeners, the percentage is even higher, in terms of those who are taking on a self drive. So today, we are going to really kind of dive into a handful of tips to ease some of the stress and so forth as you're planning this self drive trip. We're not going to focus a lot on one versus the other because we've done that. We've talked about that. Go back to the other episode on the driver host and we'll kind of share some of those benefits. But the self-drive has some advantages. You don't have to work around driver hours. That you have essentially the open road at your disposal, but there's some downsides. You're kind of always on. You've got to drive on the left side and all of that. So today we're going to help make that journey, if you will, a little easier with some helpful tips. So Connor, why don't you lead us off with number 1 there?
Sure. So the first tip is to just allow extra time in general. Google Maps is a liar when it comes to when it comes to drive times across the pond. And if your vehicle, which the vehicles that we rent for our groups, have GPS maps in the vehicle, every time before you say if you're staying a night and you're driving from say Killarney to Waterville, go on Google Maps on your phone and see what it is on there. And as well as, maybe right before you get done for that night before, go to the GPS maps and see how far it'll take with the maps within the car. And I guarantee there's going to be a difference of, I usually it's 20 to 30 minutes depending on the route. And I'm saying this a lot more towards the Republic of Ireland, whereas the roads are a little bit more, if you will, off the beaten path where it's going to take you longer. I would look more into that GPS that's kind of local GPS rather than Google Maps, because that's going to be a little bit more accurate compared to Google. Again, there's a lot more roundabouts that'll slow down the process. So I would just allocate a lot more time, because if you're trying to get to the club a few minutes or an hour earlier, it could take a little bit longer, and it cuts into that warm up time or time to grab lunch or what have you before you're around. So just allocate a little bit more time for that drive time just to make sure you're there, and all good. But there's multiple times, even when I was just over last week, one time that it took me a little bit longer. It took me about 20 minutes longer than expected. So just allocate a little bit more time for those drive times.
Yeah, it's amazing how off Google can be
Yeah.
when you go to key these in. I mean, just last week when I went from Southport up to Royal Lytham and St. Anne's,
Hmm.
it said that it was, I think it was 52 minutes, and
Yeah, no way.
it was definitely an hour and 15.
Yep.
And so whatever the time you get from Google, just if you just add, say, 25% to it, you're probably
Hmm.
going to
It's a good,
help
yeah.
yourself out. And you just don't want to be scrambling when you're trying to make a tea time, especially if you've already maybe overslept or whatever the case might be. Like you just want to make sure you've got plenty of time. You touched on the roundabouts,
Yeah.
and that ties into my tip, which is to have a navigator. What I have found driving overseas is that, quite frankly, it is kind of exhausting after a while because you're not it's well, let me rephrase it. You're rarely on like an interstate and just cruising for many miles. You might be if you're going from, say, Edinburgh, up to the Highlands or whatever, and you're on an M road for a little while, or wherever it might be. But for the most part, when you're going from, say, your hotel to the golf courses, you're going to be on more or less a local road. And that's going to entail a lot of roundabouts, narrow roads through through small villages or whatever. And so the GPS is constantly talking to you, and it is exhausting. In 1 mile, take the second exit at the roundabout. In 500 feet, take the second exit at the roundabout,
Yeah.
exit the roundabout, continue for 1 mile. Like this just continues on and on. And that hour long drive can just really wear you down. So have a navigator that is there, and maybe you can put the GPS on mute, and whoever's next to you can say, okay, at the next one you're getting off at that blue sign. Give you something to look for, because once you get in the roundabout, that's the other thing, is it's kind of stressful.
Yeah.
We don't know what we're doing with roundabouts. Let's face it, nobody on our side of the Atlantic knows how to do a roundabout. So when you get in there, you want to just kind of know, I'm going there. That's my point. Let's get to that direction. And so having somebody that says, get off at that yellow sign or the blue sign or whatever, and turn off the continuous updates, can make it a little more relaxing. I mean, not much, because you're still on the left side. You're still dealing with the roundabouts, but you won't get there and be like, gosh, I need a nap now.
That's true. Yeah. I last week I left Royal St. George's and was driving back to London, and I think it was only about 5 or 6 or so miles. It wasn't too long from essentially the clubhouse to the closest M road to get back to London. And I counted, I think it was 11 or 12 roundabouts. And you're right, it's exhausted. I got on the M road and I'm like, my gosh, I'm gonna stop for coffee. And this is like, 6 or so PM. So I was thinking about this when I was driving, when you're driving here in the States, it's second nature. It's normal. You get in the car, you drive
Yep.
from work to your home. Even if you're renting a car in a different state here in the United States, it's easy, but over there you always have to be thinking what you're doing. And when I start getting comfortable, that's when I make a mistake. That's when I take the wrong exit in the roundabout. That's when I unfortunately maybe cut someone off, or what have you, get honked at. It's just a part of the process. So you always, you've said it multiple times, when you say you have to be on, yeah, you have to be thinking, but you're always constantly thinking. And it's it's not like it's stressful all the time. It's just the process, and you're always on the process the whole time. So it's exhausting. You're right. It definitely takes some energy away from the trip. And the other big part that I would recommend for groups is to study in advance. So I found out about less than a week that I was going over. So a couple days before I departed, I went on YouTube and actually looked up some videos, and exactly how the roundabouts, how it works again, getting a video of someone driving other side of the road, because it's obviously different and you have to look different ways. There's a couple I watched, actually it was a YouTube short video, and it was just the process, how it works for a roundabout, when to turn your signal on, if you need to be in the left lane or the right lane, so on and so forth. So I would definitely watch some YouTube videos, TikToks, whatever you're into, maybe just a guide online as well, that'll be able to help you out. Other thing too that a lot of people don't know is petrol filling up. If it's petrol or diesel, a lot of times there's the tag on the on your key fob, or there's a little sticker inside kind of the gas panel too. So they make it easier. The gas handle, the size of it is different compared to if it's diesel or petrol. So it's very hard to mess up. We've had some groups that have messed that up before, but it is they make it pretty easy for you. So take a video on that. You don't pay for everything outside at the pump. You pay inside after you pay. So they trust you a little bit more. So it's just some different fun facets that are a little bit different that again, a YouTube video or just some type of guide online that could help. So
I would also throw in there to get a little bit of an understanding of the road signs, because
yeah.
there are some different ones over there that we don't have here. And I will never forget my first trip over. I was meeting up with Rue McDonald from Scottish Golf Podcast. So shout out to Rue if you're out there listening. We were going to play at Cruden Bay, and at some point I mentioned that there were all of these signs for these scenic photo spots that you're to pull off and take a photo. And that's because as you're driving along, there's all of these signs that are a camera. And me being a tourist, I'm thinking like a tourist. I'm like, oh, this is so nice of them. They're marking, they're telling us when there's going to be like a pretty spot to pull off up ahead. No, it turns out that sign is a warning that basically there are cameras that are going to take your your speed and give you a ticket if you're going too fast. I had no idea. So I'm really exposing, like, my first trip over, how little I knew about driving.
Mm.
But Rue got a good laugh at me when I told him that, that there were all of these signs for these pretty photo locations along the way. So learn up on the road signs before you go. The other tip that I have is to embrace the alternatives. And what we mean by that is, yes, you have this car, and you've paid for a rental car, and we get it, but the public transportation overseas, it's kind of incredible, like how, widespread it is, but the train system is also very efficient, and depending upon where you are, that option may be available to you, and it's such a more pleasant, stress-free way to get there. For example, I was staying in North Berwick a couple weeks ago, and I needed to go into Edinburgh for a meeting. I hopped on the train. 30 minutes later, or whatever it was, I was there, hopped back. I think it cost me £8 round trip. And it was awesome. I didn't have to think about parking. I didn't have to think about the traffic in Edinburgh or the construction, which is kind of like a continuous thing there. While I was in Southport, I wanted to go into Liverpool to go to the Cavern Club. Same thing. I hopped on the train. I think it took about an hour. I was there, came back later that evening. The train ran late. And again, I didn't have to think about driving and the parking and all of that. The point is, even though you have this car, be open to alternative ways to get to wherever you're heading. Approach your transportation as kind of just this open-ended, what options do I have to get there? And you might find an easier way.
That's a great point. And I took the train my kind of first time in Scotland. I wasn't 25 at the time, and so I couldn't rent a vehicle. And I was playing North Berwick, staying in Edinburgh. I had my clubs. I schlepped them on the train and took it out. Literally, the train station is like, I don't even know, 150 yards from the North Berwick train station to the first tee of the West Link. So kind of the last point is our final one, and is just to get lost. And we've said it multiple times, but that is the big advantage of renting and hiring your own vehicle. Is having a driver is nice. You don't have to worry about it and the stresses that we've already talked about. But the nice thing about this having a self drive is you can go out if you have an early tee time. You could go out a little bit later and get some dinner in town wherever you're staying. You can, if you have a day off, you can drive wherever you want to go. It really, the world's your oyster, if you will, when it comes to having a self-driving. That's a big advantage of kind of being able to do whatever you want to do outside of golf and what have you. So definitely get lost, see the countries. There's a lot to do even outside of golf.
But yeah, that is the number one advantage for a self-drive expedition. Go take those detours. You never know what you are going to find along the way. You might
Mhm.
set off with one place in mind, but you might detour 2 or 3 times on the way there and find that everything you discovered along the way was just as good as the destination that you had in mind to start with. But Connor, in your adventures overseas, any particular stories where you got lost along the way?
Yeah, so I've got a plenty, but I'll just kind of keep it to one, and that one's actually with you, and it was driving up to Critch Island. Just the drive up there was incredible, and we were essentially both in two different vehicles. I had my dad with me in tow, and then you were solo. And this drive out to the golf course is incredible. It's a very hilly drive, not very hilly, but it's just a lot of mounds, up and downs, and it's hard to see if there's a car coming in front of you, being honest. So those are my favorite moments of across the pond is honestly the driving, and not only just the drive to Critch Island because it was a really pretty day, but just Northwest Ireland in general. We had some really good times up there, but driving up and having pretty much a one lane street, and having to reverse probably 500 yards or so to get a cement truck back, or stopping because there was a wildlife crossing or anything like that. Just stuff you don't get here stateside, not too many places. I mean, maybe out west, if you will, but when it comes to wildlife. But even in England or the UK, you really don't get that too often, where it's on that single lane and you have to reverse. So Northwest Ireland, it's definitely for the faint of heart for driving. First time driving anywhere was up there, so I think I'm good to go. But that's one of the most special places, being up in that area. But what about yourself, DJ?
Yeah, you're right. That was a great day. I would have loved to have had a recording going of you and your dad in that car while I was the lead car. Where is he
Yeah.
taking us? I can only imagine, what was being said.
Yeah.
I've had like you said, I've had plenty of great moments like that. A couple come to mind. One was just last week. And you're talking about the differences in the roads. I decided I had finished my day at Royal Birkdale, and I decided I was going to go down to Wrexham in Wales. If anyone is a fan of the Welcome to Wrexham documentary, Ryan Reynolds owns a soccer team, and I just decided I was going to go to the stadium and the shop. And there's a pub that's in the documentary that's like right next to the stadium. So I went. It's called the Turf. The main guy that owns the pub was there. I got a selfie. I did all the things, and then I went back. But almost the entire way was on a multi-lane type interstate, an M road as they would call it, a motorway, and it was such a contrast to one of my other favorite memories, which was also in Ireland, like yours. One day I decided I was going to drive out to the Loophead Lighthouse, which is this lighthouse that feels like it's at the edge of the earth. The weather was terrible. It was a 2-lane, well, I'm like a more or less a lane and a half, largely unmarked at times, winding through village after village. And at some point, I just needed a rest. And, going back to the you never know what you're going to find along the way thing, I pulled into this cafe that doubled as like a art gallery. And first off, they had the most amazing Guinness chocolate cake that I've ever had, hands down, along with an Americano. Like, it was absolutely perfect. But I get to talking to the owner, and it turns out her husband is a sculptor. And he had done, if I have this correct, the goat at Lahinch that's out front, and the statue of Payne Stewart down at Waterville. So she had this nice book of all the photos of him making the sculptures and so forth. Super cool and completely random. I never would have encountered that if I didn't just go get lost. So those are some great stories, and that's the kind of stuff that you encounter on a self-drive trip. But Connor, we checked a lot of our boxes here before we wrap up. Any closing thoughts there?
So I had a couple other. It'll be real quick, but a couple more things. So when again going back to finding a guide or a video online, and it states if you're in the right lane and turning right and it's red, you can wait and then you can go. Well, there's no such thing as left on left, if you will, in the UK. You can't do that. It's legal. So definitely don't. I mean, it is opposite, but not to that extreme of the opposite. So make sure you just wait for the light to turn green, and then you can proceed. And the other thing too is the size of the car when you are self-driving, when you're looking to, if you do decide to book this on your own. I know when we were over last year, DJ, in Ireland, you had, I think it was a Toyota Yaris, which is very popular, kind of entry level. It's pretty good for one person. I wouldn't put two people in there, especially if you have golf clubs, checked luggage, carry-on backpack. The list goes on and on. So, us as H&B, again, we travel over, fairly frequently, and we make sure the cars are significant size for your group. Again, having luggage and those other factors in mind too. So, if you are looking at, cars and doing this on your own, if you will, make sure you are getting a vehicle that's large enough for your group, and definitely get something a little bit bigger just so you're comfortable again if you are driving.
Great stuff. And, we all have obviously GPS in our pockets, right? But if you don't have cell service, or if you if you're like me and you would just assume not pay the $10 a day for cell service if you don't have to, because Wi-Fi is everywhere. But the only place obviously it's not going to be helpful is, as you're driving. I discovered, it's been a couple trips ago, that if you are on Wi-Fi and you start your route before you leave Wi-Fi say in Google Maps, and then you walk into your car and you plug in your phone, it will give you turn by turn navigation all the way to your destination without having to pay the $10 or whatever it might be that your cell carrier, charges for international service. The downside is you lose real-time updates. So let's say something happens with traffic and it goes to give you an alternative. That goes away. And the other thing is if you do manage to clear the map, as I did on this last trip, you will have to activate service to get your GPS going again. For me, it's a game. I like to see how long can I go without giving Verizon any more money. But those are some tricks of the trade that we've learned through the years. All of these tips came from a guide that we have on our website to self-drive trips. We will be sure to include that in the show notes. If you have any questions, as always, DM us on social media or send us an email, goff@haversham.com. But otherwise, thank you for tuning in. We will be back again soon with another episode. But until then, we wish you plenty of golf at its finest and life at its best.